We never know who's watching. All right, so welcome everyone to the City of St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee Designation Subcommittee meeting for Friday, September 15th, 2023. It's now 2:05 p.m. and we have quorum, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And today this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. So now we move on to today's agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
I'm not aware of any.
Appears to be none. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Anyone?
Be happy to.
All right, Robert, thank you. Moved by Robert Sept that the designation subcommittee adopt the agenda for this meeting held on Friday, September 15th, 2023. Copies having been previously distributed. In favor? Okay, carried. Now we move on to consideration of the minutes from the previous meeting on August 18th, 2023. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or recommended changes or amendments?
And my apologies for sending those out a little bit late. I thought I had sent them with everything else, and turns out I hadn't. So if we want to even come back to this at the next meeting, that's fine as well. If anybody didn't have a chance to review them.
Would anyone like to have more time to consider them, or are you prepared to approve them? All right, nobody's taking, so I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt the minutes of the August 18th meeting. Anyone like to make that motion? Brian moves that the designation subcommittee approve the minutes of the meeting held on Friday, August 18th, 2023. In favor? All right, that carries. We go next to declarations of interest. Anyone have any declarations of interest to make? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the first item of business, which is the prioritization rubric test case discussion. And James, you'll lead us through this.
Sure. I'm happy to. Yep, that's fine. Yep. And so essentially what we were tasked with for this week is for this meeting was to go over a property on our prioritization list. And the property that we were going to go over was 3 Elizabeth Street. I know we originally talked about going over the property on Henrietta, but there's some issues related to that I thought it would just be better to play it safe and pick a property that we already know is on the register. So everybody will have had a chance to hopefully go through the rubric and rate the property accordingly. I thought it'd be good if we just went over each kind of criteria and talked about what our scores were and how we came up with our with each score, and with the hope that there's no right answer. It's everybody's opinion and thoughts on things, and maybe through the discussion we'll be able to see that somebody thought of something in a way that another person didn't. Right. So it's just meant to kind of get ideas flowing and make sure that this rubric worked for everybody. If there are any issues, or if we found that there were any issues, then this is kind of the time to voice that, because we can make changes to it. And then when we actually jump into it, next week, I'll be assigning everybody their properties, and then you can just use that rubric and do the work as you are able to. So yeah, so this is meant to be a discussion, kind of go over this property, figure out, what went right, what maybe went wrong with the rubric. And yeah, I think that makes the most sense to just go one by one through the criteria. So let me share my screen. And I noticed that a couple people were able to use the survey form, and I have their responses. And there were a couple that didn't put them through there. So maybe you just wrote them down on paper, which is fine as well, because I think we're just going to discuss it anyways here. But the ones that have been submitted, I could always just use those as our responses for this property if we wanted to, as long as there aren't any changes that anybody wants to make to their valuation. So looking at the rubric, so criteria 1 is that the property has design value, physical value because it is rare, unique, representative, or an early example of a style, type, expression, material, or construction method. And so our options were rare, unique, representative, early, and they had corresponding point totals based on how you rated them. So not sure who would like to start talking about the property. Maybe it'd help as well if I put the property up on the screen so we can talk about it. So here it is here from when we added it to the register last year. So looks pretty much the same today as it did back then. So I don't know if anybody would like to get started to talk about where they landed on this criteria.
I don't have my sheet in front of me because I submitted it through the form, but I can probably remember it as we go. But I know for the first question, I put that it was both early and representative. Early because of the speculative 1850 date, and representative because stylistically it's very characteristic of style of construction during that period that you'll find not only in that neighborhood but I think around St. Catharines and the area.
Andrew, would it be helpful? Do you want me to send you your responses? Would that be helpful?
If you could, that would be great.
Yeah, it'll just take a second for me to do that if somebody else wants to chime.
Did you get my survey as well?
Yeah, I did, Brian. Would you like me to send you yours as well? And Robert submitted his too. So
please.
Okay.
Because I submitted mine I've got 2 different laptops. I filled out the form on my other one, so it's not stored on this one that I'm using now.
Or if it's, you know what, it might just be helpful. I could always run through what your answers were and you can speak to them if you'd like. That might be easier than trying to send emails to everybody. So, okay. So, yeah, as Andrew mentioned, representative and early. Brian, you had unique and representative as your 2.
I had which?
Unique and representative.
Ah, okay.
And then Robert had unique and representative as well. And then Holly, did you take a look at it? And Mark?
Yeah, I had unique and early on that one too. Unique really was because it is, especially on that stretch of Elizabeth, it's very unique. You mostly see rows of war times from this century or the 1900s, and that's really the only one that's unique about that strip of properties.
And Holly, what did you have for yours?
I did unique, representative, and early.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting. I looked at it as well, and I only had it as representative. But the only reason why I looked at it as representative was because the early, like the 1850 date, I wasn't 100% sure about. It seemed a little later than that to me. And when I looked at some of the mapping, I did a little bit of digging just to, look at, just to do a little more in-depth research into it. And looking at some of the mapping, this part of Elizabeth Street might not have been really developed or even created yet until a little bit later than 1850. So it was hard to pin down exactly what the building date might be. The property was owned by it's called the Beggy House, and the Beggy family was it looks like, from what I could tell from some of the research, was they mostly owned and operated like a wallpaper store, I guess, near St. Paul Street. And they seem to kind of become a little more prominent in like the St. Catharines Standard or whatnot, around closer to the turn of the century. But I also noticed that Brian had written about a Francis Beggy when he was writing about Rodman Hall, when they did the designation for that. And so it's possible that maybe he was related to the house as well. It was really hard to tell exactly what the age might be. So I was a little apprehensive of putting early for it. But I definitely think it's representative of kind of that Gothic revival style that was around at that time. And I could definitely understand the idea of it being unique, on this street in particular, because most of the houses on the street are pretty vernacular. Like this is the most ornate for sure on Elizabeth Street.
Yeah.
And it actually, to me, seemed to fit in better with York Street, with all the houses along York, which are a lot more kind of architecturally, like there's a lot of really nice brick buildings on York, with really nice porches and a lot of architectural details that Elizabeth Street seems to be missing. So this kind of seemed like a little bit of like an offshoot of that stretch. And so it seems like somebody who wanted to maybe live on York Street and built a nice home as close as they could to it. But no, it sounds like everybody was relatively on the same page, though. The idea that it's definitely representative, though, of this style. And then, it's just a matter of if we were able to pin down a date. I think if this got to the point where we actually went towards for designation, we'd want to pin down, what's the building date and is it actually early? And I think, you could make a case that it's unique in this area and on this street. So, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I didn't put down that the house was early because my understanding of the way the city developed was anything north of Welland Avenue was sort of a post 1860s, 1870s area of development. Mm-hmm. So I thought that, this house really, the style of it, the architectural style and everything, to me suggests more something around 1870. I mean, that's still an early house, but it's not as early as the 1850 date.
Mm-hmm.
But
I did a little more research on this one just because this was on my list previously, and I agree with that. The 1850 came from the city's files, which so I thought there was a chance somebody knew something that I didn't see. But if it was there before the 1870s, it was not built by the Beggies because they were not there till the 1870s. I know that. One of the interesting things about it is the Beggy family was there for at least 5 generations until at least the 1960s. So the association with that family is a long one. But I guess I think the date is right. I didn't mind putting early just in case the 1850 was right, but I knew it was trumped by the what do you call it, the other category anyway, because it's the higher scoring category is the one that matters.
Yes. So I just wanted to throw this map up. This is the Tremaine map from roughly 1860 or so. Brian probably knows the exact date, but it's around 1860. And I believe this is the west portion of Elizabeth Street, and then you can see this portion hasn't been developed yet. It's still owned by, it looks like there's a series of owners that own still rather large lots. So at some point these have been subdivided soon after this map was created, because there's some other maps of the area. Just grab those.
Yeah, and I think the answer, as you said, if we most of the designation, the answer is going to be in the land registry records anyway.
So you can see as we get to 1875, this street now exists, right? So sometime between 1860 and 1875, this stretch was built. And for all we know, this little depiction here, or one of these little, could be the house, right? So, I do think 1850 is probably incorrect. And I think if it was in the 1860 or 1870 range, it maybe wouldn't be as early as, or we maybe would say that it's an early example. I would also say it's definitely not an early example of its style, right? Because Gothic Revival buildings have been around for decades by that point as well. So there's probably a lot of other examples in the city that are probably earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was the reason I didn't put unique, was because certainly on that street it's unique, but you don't have to get too far off that street before you find several similar ones. But it's a matter of how much you narrow it down. It's certainly a very distinctive house on that street, and I think that's an important street for a variety of reasons. So,
for sure. Okay, so we'll kind of move on from that one. And the next one was design value and physical value, and it's basically a yes/no question. I personally had yes as my response, but let me just go over what everybody else had. So it looks like it was yeses all around. Brian, Robert, and Andrew all said yes. Mark and Holly, I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, same here.
Yes.
I have it here too.
Yeah, I thought all the wood trim and everything, assuming that's original. Go ahead, Mark.
Do you want to know what our values were right now, or should we just like go as we go?
Yeah, I think we could just go as we go, and then at the end we can kind of tally it up and see where we all kind of ended up. And
Okay.
I have a feeling we're all going to end up roughly in the same ballpark, but
All right.
yeah. So yeah, so it sounds like yeses all around, and I think definitely the barge board and wood trim and the porch and everything, assuming if that's all original, then I think that's definitely reflective of a high degree of craftsmanship. Because oh, actually, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Let me put the building back up. So I think all this barge board work under the gable, I think the wood trim around the bay window, and then the porch definitely, you know, they all have elements of high craftsmanship, I think, and that's assuming that they are original. It might be a property that, unless we get actually onto the property and can explore that a little bit, and actually see the materials up close, it might be a challenge to figure that out. But it's definitely in kind of a Gothic style, right? So. So, and I think that's okay that we don't know the answer to that. I think even just saying, you know, yep, right now it looks like it might have that high degree of craftsmanship merits us looking into it further if we decide that, you know, it merits looking at designation, right? So
when I took a look at all that trim, I thought it feels like it should be original, because I mean the Victorians would have really gone into highly ornate designs like that, whereas when you get stuff that you buy from Home Hardware or whatever today, Home Depot, that's Victorian looking, it's not quite this ornate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I thought, you know, it's got to be an original features.
You stand on the sidewalk and look at it too, it looks like it has some age to it. It doesn't look as clean and pristine as certainly a recent reproduction would look. So
okay, so yeah, so it sounds like everybody's on the same page there, so that's great. Moving on to, so I don't imagine anybody would suggest that it demonstrated a high degree of technical or scientific achievement. So maybe we just move on past that one. So then we move on to criteria 4. So the property has historical value or associative value because it has direct associations with a theme, event, belief, person, activity, organization, or institution that is significant to a community. And so I'll look at everybody's responses. Sorry, I'm jumping between many screens, so to bear with me. So Brian had no significance. Robert had fair significance. Andrew had good significance, and I had fair significance. My basis for ranking it as fair was that it might be related to the Beggy family, who had some links to the business community, especially on St. Paul Street. Not the most important family necessarily, but you know, it's still a family that's been mentioned in the standard and has played a role in the community. So I gave it basically just, you know, the bare minimum that I could possibly give it, I guess. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I had there as well. Sorry, Andrew.
no, go ahead, it's fine. Yeah, I rated it higher than other people, I guess it looks like, but to me it was because of the significance I attribute to the family and the level of craftsmanship of their work, and certainly Brian in his report on Rodman Hall talked about the work there, which I think is very significant. And from my own research, I remember them being involved in a number of significant buildings through St. Catharines as well. The second generation, I've forgotten his name, he was the chief of the fire department of St. Catharines for a time, which to me lends some significance and so on. So that was my rationale for rating it higher. But again, these are all subjective. It's where do you how significant is that? So.
Well, and I think too, it's hard to know, and I don't know if you knew the answer to this, Andrew, but like, did all those people actually live in this house, or were they part of the Beggy the larger Beggy family? Right? I don't know the answer to that. Do you know?
From my research, it looks like it was the primary, the three generations who owned the Beggy and Sons company were all lived there. The fourth and fifth generation that lived there were a daughter and son-in-law, and he was an accountant rather than a tradesperson. So, so it looks to me like it was the primary people in the family who were there for the generations when that the family's company was active and prominent. So that was the way it appears to me. But again, how significant is a tradesperson? That's again.
Yeah, the way that I've written it, the way that I've written it,
I've seen those people get more recognition. That's part of my own bias.
Yeah, so the way that I've kind of written it in the rubric is that if you the good rating was it has a direct connection to an aspect of the city's history that may not be the most significant, but still helps to tell a story about the city or a specific neighborhood or community. And then fair is it has a limited connection to the history of the city or an element of its history. And I don't know, a craftsman working on a really important building is really important, right? But it's like to me the more significant thing is like who owned that building and who so yeah, it's I can see where there'd be some gray area, but I kind of erred on the side of caution, I guess, in that sense. But
yeah.
And Brian, I think you had poor for this one, no connection. So I don't know.
Yeah, I probably I guess I wasn't really thinking so much about narrowing down, focusing on the family as such. So if that's part of the criteria for this particular part of the survey, then I guess maybe I should bump it up to maybe fair or good instead of saying that there's no connection at all. So that's my misunderstanding, I guess.
No, that's okay. Holly, did you have any thoughts on that? Or Robert?
No, I was good with. I thought fair was a reasonable decision.
And Holly, you're okay as well?
Yeah, I did fair. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think fair and good. I think we're going to maybe run into that issue a fair bit, maybe, where there are going to be potentially families that, do have that sort of minor link and trying to figure out, okay, how much significance is that link in terms of the grand scheme of, the city's history? Might be hard to determine. I think if it gets to the point, I think what's going to happen is we're going to add up all these numbers at the end of like when we evaluate all these properties, and we're going to end up with all these properties that are going to probably maybe be lumped together. They're going to have similar ratings. And maybe what we'll have to do is we'll have to look a little bit closer at things like, how important were these families, right? And to differentiate between one property and another. And also we're only looking at this in kind of isolation. I think as you start looking at other properties and you start seeing, different families emerge, or, you're going to be able to compare and contrast a lot better, right? Whereas here we're just looking at it with blinders on. And so it's a little hard to, compare the Beggy family to another family, like another hypothetical family, right? So hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer. And it might even be a case where, like, as you start doing your work, you'll realize like, oh, you know what? One of the first properties that I looked at, I maybe underranked this a little bit as you start, delving into some of the other properties. So we can always tweak that and go back in and change those scores if we want to. It's easy to do. So, okay, so we'll move on then to criteria 5, which is the property has historical value or associated value because it yields or has the potential to yield information that contributes to an understanding of the community. And looks like Brian put maybe. There were no's for Robert and myself, and Andrew had a yes. And then I'm not sure, Mark and Holly, what did you have for that?
I had a yes, because from the research that I did, I saw like the Beggy family was pretty large in St. Catharines in St. Catharines during the 1800s. So like there could have been, and I had printed off the previous one where there wasn't a maybe. So I forgot about, so I just said yes.
My yes was based on the fact that if these are the people who lived there and owned the house were the same people who did the plaster work at Rodman Hall and other very significant buildings, what is there inside that building that's worthy of preservation or has information, has educational value in terms of that type of work. So that was the basis of my yes.
Yeah, I thought about that, but didn't think about that in this criteria. But I thought about because the Baggies, in the research that I saw, they owned a wallpaper store around the turn of the century, and I just thought, oh, there might be, you peel back a layer or two, and you might have some like top-notch, materials that would be pretty rare in the city, right? Or maybe they're very evident. The owner of this property is actually a rock professor, and he did some digging to the property when we first put it on the register. He didn't mention anything about interiors, but if this was a property that, like, if we explained, the history of it to him, maybe he would be able to point out, oh yeah, I do have some amazing plaster work and stuff like that, right? So I think hopefully, a lot of owners will be willing to work with us on these types of things. But yeah, I guess I always think of this criteria as stuff that just can't be really easily ascertained, whereas this is just knocking on a door and asking, can we see inside your house, right? So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's why I said maybe, because I didn't want to say outrightly no, but without knowing, I didn't want to say a definite yes. So that's why I erred on the side of maybe, pending further research. So I wonder if that's something we could add to the form is to have that kind of gray area, like, well, let's hedge our bets. Maybe there is.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do have a maybe, but it's kind of in a way that's I didn't think about, right? I didn't think about this idea that there could be interior attributes and whatnot that. So yeah, but I'll fiddle around with it and see if there's something that maybe makes sense there to flesh that out a little bit more. Because yeah, it is important, especially if a building like this, does have those great features in the interior. It's not often that you would necessarily designate interior features. On a lot of houses, it's a challenging thing to do, but there are certainly a lot of buildings like in St. Catharines, like Rodman Hall or churches, or Andrew, I'm sure the Brown Homestead maybe has interior features as well, if I'm not mistaken. So there are exceptions to it, but typically, in my experience, especially when I was working in Toronto, tried to avoid doing interiors. It's a really challenging thing to, especially when you're dealing with a large swath of properties, right? It's a tough thing to manage, and it's hard to get into people's houses and find out if they altered their fireplace or anything like that, right? So tried to keep things to more so the public realm, I guess. But yeah, we can cross that road when we get to it, I guess.
One other thing I should also say about the Baggy family, seeing we're talking about the significance of them. I mean, Baggies are not only wallpaper merchants, but they were also painters, house painters, but they also did sign painting. And if you go down St. Paul Street, where Beatty's old store used to be, and there's that bridge connecting St. Paul Street to the arena down below. There's two large signs on either side. One is for the American Bazaar and one is for Eccleston's Clothing. And if you look at the bottom of those hand-painted signs, you'll see F. Baggy. So he's actually signed his work. Robin McPherson and I did a report for the committee quite a few years ago on the ghost signs on St. Paul Street. So you can see the story there if you still got that file. So, I mean, they did very visible things like, those 10 or 15 foot tall promotional signs for local merchants.
Cool.
Could that be something you could add to the sheet about interior? It's my friend just bought a property on 3 Midland Street across from Montevello Park, and he's doing the interior, and he had me over there, and there were some really unique things like the fireplace. It was from 1820. He pulled it apart and it's stamped, and the staircase, the woodwork, like some really, really neat features of that house.
Yeah, we certainly can, and we're going to come across a bunch of properties in the city that definitely have interior features that we're going to know about. Some of our listed properties include places like the Keg, right, where it's like, okay, we know that that building has certain interior features because we've all probably been in there for dinner, right? Whereas there's going to be a lot of houses that like none of us have ever stepped foot in. We have no idea what's in them. You can sometimes maybe infer just based on the quality of the architecture on the outside what might be inside, but you know, over 150 years or 130 years, you know, things change, right? And people rip stuff out and tastes change and stuff like that. So it's going to be hard to guess sometimes, but yeah, we certainly can. I can add something where it says, you know, if we either know or think that there may be interior features, we can have a little checkbox for that as well. I think that makes sense. So, okay. Do you have anything else on that one that we wanted to talk about? Criteria 5. We can move on to criteria 6 then, which is so does this property have historical associative value because it demonstrates or reflects the work or ideas of an architect, artist, builder, designer who's important to the community. So both Brian and Robert had no's for this. Andrew had yes. I had a no. Mark and Holly, what did you have for this?
I had a no because I couldn't find like for sure an architect or builder.
Right. Andrew, I assume maybe your yes was because of the baggies?
Yeah, artist and designer category rather than builder and architect. And I, you know, obviously I think probably architect is more significant than you know, a craftsperson, but it just seemed to fall under the umbrella. So I said yes.
Right. Holly, what did you have for
I had
one?
no. I had no. No.
Okay. And then so the options there were poor, good, or excellent. And so Andrew, you had excellent for that one, but everybody else would have had poor. So but that's okay. I think what's going to happen is we're going to find you know, somebody's score is going to be an outlier potentially. And in this case, I'm trying to do the math as we're going. And you know, when we actually get at the end of the day, or you know, in a few months from now, we have all these scores and everything. I'll be able to look at some of those properties and say, oh, why did Andrew score this way, and you know, Holly scored it this way, and we're going to have those conversations because I think it's important that we figure out, you know, which property should rise to the top, right? So it's not just a matter of, okay, this is our score and we're sticking to it. It's, you know, let's have a conversation about how we got there, because we're doing this for this property right now, but you're going to do 20 plus properties on your own, and you're not going to have any idea what anybody's thinking about them, right? So it's important that we then are able to come back to this group and talk about them in a way that, you know, maybe lets us kind of rescore things or think of things differently.
And I don't mind either adjusting my approach based on what seems to be the collective, you know, approach. You know, obviously it's going to be subjective, but I don't mind trying to be a little closer in line with the way people look at those things. So if, you know, it's a subjective thing and most people look at it a little differently, they may all adjust accordingly. So.
Well, and I don't think there's any problem with having different views on things, right? If all of us came to the same score on everything, you know, this process we wouldn't even need this committee, really, right? Like we probably just would know, okay, these are the 10 we're going to look at, or 15 or 20 or whatever it's, right? So, but it's good to have these conversations, and you know, there might be properties too that, you know, when we get down to it, we might have properties where it's like, you know, we might have a cutoff where it's like, okay, we know we can tackle this many properties, and we get towards the end of that list and we say, one person's going to say, no, I think really strongly about, or feel really strongly about this one property. And another person might say, I feel strongly about this other property. Right. And so we're going to have those conversations and figure out, you know, which properties are we going to focus on. So no, I think difference of opinion is really good. So yeah. So moving on, then it sounds like Andrew's the only dissenting view on that one, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. And so criteria 7, I started to have a little bit, I wouldn't say trouble, but when I was thinking about contextual stuff, this was a challenging property, I thought. And I know when Andrew brought all these properties forward, we thought of Elizabeth Street as a whole, kind of made the argument that Elizabeth Street was, you know, a certain character because it kind of reflected the working class of St. Catharines at that time. But this building seemed to kind of be outside of that a little bit because of who the people who owned it were, and also just the quality of the architecture. So I'm curious to see what people thought. But let me just pull up everybody's responses. So for criteria 7, which was, does the property define, maintain, or support the character of an area? Robert, Brian, and Andrew all had maintains the character of the area. I had supports the character. Holly and Mark, what did you have for that?
I had maintain.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in between, like, because I was looking at Elizabeth Street as a whole instead of like more high level view of it. So like at first I said 5 because like to me that was it's defining part of the street because everything else was so boring, and if that was gone, it's like the vibrant yellows of the trim, the way it's kept, it's very unique in that area. So if that was gone, it would to me it would alter the look of the street.
Right. So my rationale for going the opposite direction and saying that it just supports the character was largely because the street is mostly vernacular buildings that kind of have a similar style in that there's not much about them, right? It's this house kind of stands out as kind of the most architecturally significant, and doesn't necessarily fit. I thought if this house was on York Street, like if it was one house over, 2 houses over, and was sitting at the corner, I would make the argument, yep, it fits in perfectly with York Street, but it doesn't necessarily to me fit with Elizabeth Street. Like it feels like it's a different part of the story, I guess. So that was kind of where I was thinking. And if you remove that building, the character of Elizabeth Street would kind of still be the same, right? It would still tell that story of working class housing from a certain era. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that how you would differentiate between maintains and supports? Is what you're saying now?
I think
To
so.
me,
Like
that's
maintain.
hard to separate.
Yeah, like I think maintain is that it's part of that group. So if we were talking about one of the other buildings on Elizabeth Street, let's say, that's more vernacular in style, I would definitely put all of those as maintain. Like I'm not sure if there's any houses on the street that define the street necessarily. I think there's a large grouping of them that kind of maintain together, right? Whereas I felt like this one kind of it just seems like an outlier compared to the other ones. But that was just my perspective on it. I don't know. Like I said, there's no correct answer, so I could be wrong on it. But yeah, that was how I looked at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also thinking a little more broadly than just the street, because as you said, right around the corner on York Street, it becomes it's much more understandable why that's there.
Yeah. Well, and that I thought about that too. I was like, okay, if you extend outward and you look at York, and then I thought, okay, is this, how broadly do you think of an area, right? Like, is it just that street and what you can experience on that street, or should you extend outward from there and say, even houses that are close to it contribute to it? It's a challenging one. I think contextual arguments are always going to be kind of a tough one to argue either for or against, because you can make that argument. You can make an argument that every house is contextual in some way, right? So, okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that one? Holly, what did you had maintained for that one, right? And Mark, you went with define, or did you go with maintain, Mark?
Well, as we started talking about, I would say maintain, though I'm looking more at it as like a low level street thing, where that house to me defines the street of it being like very unique, to have just like almost just one house that's that old on it, right? I don't know. So if it was removed, then it would just be the same vanilla street, So we'll stick with the fine, but I also understand what it now means about maintaining and supporting as well.
Sure.
But if I look at higher level, like in all of like Midtown, I would give it a support. Right. So
yeah, it depends on
what we're doing.
You want to be, right? Like, yeah. Okay, that's okay, because I think at the same time, I mean, the point values are not that far apart, right? It's, 2 points here, 2 points there. At the end of the day, we're going to end up with a number, and that number, isn't set in stone. Just because maybe we come up, we say this is a 20 out of this gets 20 points, right? Whether it got 21 or 19, I don't think in the grand scheme of things kind of matters. It's more so, how are we going to slot this in and compare it to all the other properties, right? So I think we're going to find that a whole bunch of properties might sit with 18 or 17 or 20 points, but we'll then have a conversation about those properties and figure out, okay, are the ones that actually do maybe deserve it more than the other ones? So this is just to get us to that point, I think. So okay, so we'll move on then to number 8, which is the property has contextual value because it is physically, functionally, visually, or historically linked to its surroundings. So we'll pull up responses. Okay, so what I'm discovering, so I'll explain what happens on this side. So when you fill out your form, it basically creates an Excel spreadsheet for me, which is great. It lays out everybody's responses. Because there's 4 different options, it actually it really gets messy for this one. So I might rewrite our form to make it a little cleaner for myself. But essentially, Brian thought that it was physically, functionally, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings. Robert had physically, visually, and historically, so he didn't have function. Andrew had all 4, and I agreed with Robert, I was the only one that didn't have visually. So I had physical, functional, and historical. Mark and Polly, what did you have?
Physical, visually, and historically. I did too.
That's what I had too. I didn't do the function.
Now, I think I need to change the way I'm looking at things, because sometimes I'm like the last one, I was looking at it only in the street, right? Where this one, I was looking at it as the whole area too. So I need to narrow down then, like how I'm looking at it with each number, right?
Yeah.
But I did have visually, historically, and physically. That was it.
Yeah, my rationale for not having visually was because this building, because compared to the rest of Elizabeth Street, it doesn't fit because of how architecturally kind of ornate it is, right? And so, but if we went the other way and we said, well, this property, maybe has some linkages to York Street, which does have those types of buildings, maybe I would have went the other way, right? So,
right.
Perspective and trying to figure out what's the definition of surroundings, right? Like it's a hard one, right? So did anybody else have any thoughts on this one?
Just that this was the hardest question for me to get my head around as to how to look at it. I could argue for and against each one of those very easily. So it's how do you decide? It's the most challenging question to me, I think.
Yeah, and to me, having done a lot of evaluations over the years, especially when it's on the private side, like we would often make the argument that like every building is contextual, right? You can easily say that almost any building meets this criteria in some way, right? And so it was almost like the low-hanging fruit of criteria, and it was like, okay, if you only meet this one, probably not a building you want to be, arguing in favor of designation for. I think it's one of those things that helps support other criteria. But I think there's other ones that, even though we value all of them kind of equally, technically, I think in reality, this is kind of like the lowest, maybe not lowest in value, but the easiest to achieve. And so it doesn't, to me, have as much kind of teeth to it as maybe, you know, architectural significance or a historical association or something like that. So, okay, and we move on to landmark. So Brian had yes, it was a landmark. Both Andrew and Robert had no, and I had a no as well. Mark and Holly, what did you have?
I said no.
Yeah, that was a tough one too, because it looks like a landmark on the street to me. But I've never heard of, hey, let's meet at like this house with the yellow trim, you know, things like that. So I'm looking at it as a whole community and as a city now. Is it a landmark? No, not to most people, right?
Yeah, that's how I looked at it. So sorry, go ahead.
Narrowing down in a street view, I would say yes, right? But the perspective then changes in that case.
Was that not what I said on my form, that it was that it wasn't a landmark within the city in the same way that Rodman Hall or the old courthouse is, but that along the streetscape or within its neighborhood, it might be considered as a landmark building that everybody knows.
Yeah, I'm looking now. Yeah, there's in your comment section, that's what you put. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because I think a landmark to me is one of those buildings that everybody knows. It's kind of you know, it is the Rodman Hall, right? Where, you know, if you mention that, everybody immediately knows what you're talking about. This building, you know, to people on the street, might be like, yeah, I know that building. But even then, I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if it's a building, how widely that's known, right? You know, the neighbors probably know about how nice of a building it is, but if you go one block over, they might not have any idea that house is there, just because they have their own houses on their own streets that maybe are of equal significance, right? So that's what I was thinking in terms of landmark and whether or not it meant or not. And I didn't feel strongly about it meaning it. So, but I can see the rationale for it. Yeah. So I'm just doing some math. Mark and Holly, I don't have all of your numbers in front of me, so I don't know. Mark, did you have yours already added?
Yeah, I have them right out in front of me. Which ones do you need?
So I need number 1, 2, 4, and 5.
1 is 3.
Okay.
And you said 2 as well?
2, yeah. 1, 2, 4, and 5.
What, 2, 7?
Okay.
4 was 1.
Okay.
Now, and what was the other one? Then we'll go back to what I'm
5. Number 5.
5. 5 was 5.
Okay.
Now, if I may, if like Brian was saying that the Ecclestone, a hand-painted Ecclestone clothing sign, like that's significant, right? Yeah. I think that should be I don't know, that could be something that we designate too, right? In the future. But if we find out that Francis Beggy did paint that, and he did in fact live in that house, this might up those numbers.
Yeah.
Too, right? Because that's a significant piece in St. Catharines. So many photos, like you see a downtown photo of St. Catharines, a lot of the time you're going to see that Ecclestone painting, right?
Yeah.
So right now it's a 1, but it could be more.
Okay. And Holly, what did you have for those numbers? Sorry, I was trying to keep track of everybody's.
1 is 3.
Okay.
2, I've got 8. 4, I have 1, and 5, I have 5.
Okay. Let me just do some math. Okay, so here's what we came up with. So Brian, your total was 35. Andrew, yours was 37. Robert, yours was 23. Mark was 24. Holly was 22. Mine was mine was 15. So I was the outlier there for sure. But yeah, so two of us, Andrew and Brian, were lumped in together, 35, 37. That's, pretty much identical for the most part. Robert, Mark, Holly, 22, 23, 24. Like that's a grouping there that, really not much difference there. So it's really interesting. I think that we came to kind of these conclusions, but I think it's good that that there were kind of groupings of how people kind of came to the same conclusion. I think what's interesting is, if Brian and Andrew were the ones tasked with this property would probably be definitely one of the ones we would designate, I think, because 35 and 37, I think, would be pretty high scores compared to a lot of other properties. Whereas the scores in the 20s would probably, maybe in that mushy middle where we're not sure, if this would be one that rises to the top. But I think generally, we all kind of came to a similar conclusion. I think Brian's a large chunk of his, he had 35 points, but 10 of those were landmark status, right? So he actually, if he decided he didn't feel strongly about that, he then drops down to 25, and now we have a group of 4 people huddled in the 20s, right? And Andrew is the outlier in the 30s. So I think this worked how I envisioned it. I don't know if anybody has any kind of thoughts on how this resulted or the result that we came to. Or if there was something a part of the the rubric that you found challenging or that worked well, or because I think what we want to do is make sure that this is something that's intuitive for everybody to use over the next couple of months while you're out doing this work.
I think in general it makes sense, and I think it's important just for the work of the committee that I sort of keep in mind. My score I think it reflects my personal opinions more so than it reflects the Ontario Heritage Act, which I think is lacking in recognizing certain types of properties and certain types of people. But we are tasked with approaching this, looking at it through the lens of the Ontario Heritage Act. So from that standpoint, I think I need to bite my tongue a little bit and adjust, only because I think for the committee to do its work, we can't be in a position where the properties that I happen to be scoring get undue attention. We want to have some standardization across the board. So you were saying different opinions are good, and I agree, but I think there also is a line there, and I will try to be mindful of that moving forward.
Well, and what's going to happen? So I'm going to look at every property. That's part of my job. So I'll be scoring at each one, and then we'll have 2 of you on every property. And so it'll be the 2 different people on each one, hopefully. But yeah, so we're going to eventually, each property is going to have 3 evaluations, and we'll figure out how to weight that in terms of what the values end up being. But what I think is going to happen is similar to this, where we're going to come to the similar conclusions. And any properties where we have some sort of outlier, or if somebody, in this case, Andrew, your score was much higher, right? So we might come to you and say, Andrew, why did you rank it this way? And maybe everybody would want to bump theirs up to be closer to yours, or maybe you'd be like, oh, you know what, you guys are making a good point. I'm going to pull mine closer to your total, right? So really this point kind of project is to lead us to a conversation, and then that will lead us to our end of the day, our list at the end of the day, right? So no, I think this worked well. And I think some of the arguments that were made, especially about the Beggy family and whatnot, like as much as my score was low, I could easily see mine bumping up. I didn't think of things necessarily in the same way as everybody else did, but yeah, I think a score in the 20s makes a lot of sense to me for this property for sure. And I think when we start looking at a lot of properties around the city, and start comparing a property like this to maybe some of the ones on Oakdale, right? This property is actually going to, even though it's in the 20s, it's probably going to be close to the line for where we're going to decide, it deserves designation. Because I think there's going to be quite a few properties that are a little more or a little less ornate and maybe don't score as highly because of just, their location, where they are and whatnot. So no, I think this worked really well. Does anybody else have any feedback that they want to provide about the form, so I can make sure that that's incorporated for everybody?
Yeah, I think that this exercise was good for me because it helped to clarify, how we should be looking at the different buildings in terms of the questions on the form. So it was good.
Yeah, I agree. The form worked really well for me. Just with my phone, I was really quite pleased how well it worked. Surprised, actually, how well it worked. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Mark, go ahead.
We didn't touch on the additional criteria, did we?
No, we didn't. So we can talk about that though. So yeah, so we talked about additional criteria. So building and architectural integrity was the one question that we had. So this, I think the architectural integrity, that's something that's going to come up as we start to compare properties, because I think we'll want to make sure that we're looking at properties that maybe have a really strong kind of architectural integrity or intact, or they're in a condition where it's like we can get that to that point, right? A lot of features haven't been removed and stuff like that. So for this property, I had a 5 for this one. I thought that it seemed like it was architecturally, intact, not a lot of alterations over the years. It seemed like it was, in good shape from that perspective and had been well maintained over the years. Just trying to find. So Brian had a 4 out of 5 for this one. Robert had 3 out of 5. Andrew had 4 out of 5. And Mark and Holly, what did you have for that?
I had a 4 out of 5. It does look like it does look sound, and the integrity it looks up there. The only thing is, if we're looking at it as an original build, it does have a render on it, right? So, but everything looks sound, so that's why I gave it a 4 instead of a 5, because I don't know what the condition of the cladding underneath the render.
Yeah, because right now it's like a stucco, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's true. And what was it before, right? Originally, maybe was it just a red brick building, or is this so? Yeah, maybe I would drop mine down from a 5 as well. It's a really good point. Holly, what did you have?
I did 4. James, I have a question. Like,
Sure.
when we're doing this, do we have to do some more research, like going to the library and looking, like, to see if, say you see a porch and it has possibly the pillars are maybe you've got like siding, aluminum siding, they're capped
Sure.
off, but they could have the original pillars under the porch, and maybe there's a photograph of that home that has the picture of the pillars. Like my friend on Midland, he's got these cappings on his porch, and he's like, do you think if I take these cappings off, the original pillars are underneath?
Yeah.
Do we have to do more research?
No, I don't want you doing more research than you feel you have time to do or want to do, right? Like there might be the odd property where you're like, you know what, I think there's more to this and I'd like to do a little bit of digging into it. But yeah, no, there's no expectation that you would do that. You're already devoting enough time to this project. I don't want to have you doing, intensive research on every property. But yeah, if there's the odd property where you're like, you know what, I feel like there's something here and I'm interested in it, more information is not going to hurt us, right? So if you do feel like you want to look into something, by all means, you're more than welcome to. Yeah, it's like I'll be doing a little more digging because that's my job, I guess. And so I'll hopefully be able to cover a few of those things and capture some of that stuff. But and some stuff we're just not going to have information for, like Elizabeth Street. The number of historical photos that were taken of this building is probably 0, right? Like the odds of our museum or our library having a photo of this building from that time, it's needle in a haystack type of thing. So some of these properties that like the Keg building, we're gonna have tons. We're gonna have so much information about, right? But some of these houses, yeah, we're just not gonna have anything because nobody would have thought to take pictures of them and document them and then submit them to the library, right? So yeah. Robert?
If I'm not mistaken, I think I said I gave it a 3. I think I made some comments there, I believe, that explain why I gave it a 3.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, so you said there were altered windows and a rear addition.
And wasn't there an ivy issue, or was that the next one? The ivy was taking over, and it was right up in the gables. I had some real concerns with it, its ability to ruin the finishes. Certainly the stucco. That the picture I had, or at least when I was there, the yellow fascia across the gable was completely covered.
Yeah, you can see on this side.
Yeah, and it was actually right across the front of the house.
Yeah,
and that was on Wednesday. I think I was there.
Right.
So I had some real concerns about, well, I couldn't see exactly. I couldn't see this yellow trim work at all. So,
no,
all
I think
saw
that's
was
fair.
Yeah, I
gingerbread
don't know if
on the
anybody can
porch.
see. That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. They said I couldn't see that at all. The ivy has taken over, and I've got some concerns about the condition of the exterior of the property.
Yeah. Anytime you see that much foliage on the building, it's concerned because that moisture, right, it has nowhere to go if it gets trapped back there. So yeah. And yeah, the rear addition is a good point. So there is, I don't know if we can see it in this picture. You can kind of see a sliver of it back here.
That's right.
I had looked, so we have a footprint of the building. So it's this building here. Can everybody see that? The map that I've just pulled up?
Yep.
So this is a fire insurance plan. So you can see it did have a 1-story addition at one point. It looks like now that addition's 2 stories.
Right.
Like that back here looks like a 2-story addition, right? Because you can see the roof up here. So yeah, at some point that addition was changed. Either a second floor was added or a completely different addition was created for it. So yeah, I could definitely see a 3 for this one as well because of those reasons. And to be honest, if you look at even the windows, look like they're not wood, which they would have been originally.
Those are replacements, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even look at these ones up here. When I was looking at down here, no, it's hard to tell.
I think it was.
But yeah,
because
I think you can make an argument for a 3 or a 4 on this for architectural integrity. Certainly the most important features like all the wood trim, that's all in great condition. Those are kind of the elements that would definitely be attributes of this house. So that's great. But yeah, I can see why you would say this is a 3. And like I said, that's going to factor in when we get to the end of the day and we evaluate, look at all these properties that compare and contrast, right? And so, we might say, yeah, this building has a 3, another building has a 2. Let's focus on this one because, its most important features are still intact, right? So,
Right.
that was the reason I think why I gave it a 4. I looked at it and I said, well, it's got a lot of its original structure is there, but it's got these replacement windows. And I did note that at least they've retained the original window opening, that they haven't, enlarged that. But I thought, well, you've got these plate glass windows, which are clearly not original, so I can't give it full marks.
Right.
yeah, and I think as we compare, as you start looking at other properties too, and you see the level of integrity of those properties, it's kind of relative to everything else, right? So, you might look at this and say, yeah, it's a 3, but then you find that there's a lot of properties that are in even worse shape, and so all of a sudden that 3 doesn't look so bad, right? So
That's right.
Okay, so if we don't have anything else for the rubric, I'll make the changes to the rubric and add a little bit to it on Monday. And what I'm going to do is I'll send out a link to it for everybody to review. Perhaps you can take a look. Let me know if there's anything you want me to add to it or kind of tweak. We can just do all that by email. That's not a problem. I don't know. don't really need a motion, I don't think, for this one. Andrew, I think we're okay for just saying, you know, this has just been a discussion. There isn't anything to really pass a motion for.
Unless we want to, in the info you sent before, we talked about whether we were going to approve this rubric or not. You don't think that we don't do that? I mean, if we're sort of ready to say this is the system we want to use, then it might be useful if you think.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. I forgot that I mentioned that, but yeah, we can, if we want as a group, we can say, yep, this is the rubric that we are going to use, and kind of pass a motion that, yep, we're all in favor of that.
It seemed like everyone was pretty happy with it. So
yeah,
maybe if nobody would wants to recommend a change, and if everyone's sort of happy with it, we can formally just say we can do a motion and approve it for that purpose.
And actually, it'd be a good idea to do that, because I think Lorraine at the last Heritage Committee meeting asked if we could bring the rubric back to them, just to show them what we've come up with. So we can bring this. We can say we've passed a motion that that we're in favor of using this rubric, and then in a couple of weeks we'll show it to the rest of the committee.
One question with these forms when we're evaluating the houses and filling them out, should we be taking pictures of the house to attach with the form?
You certainly can. You don't have to, but there is a spot to be able to upload photos if you want to. So
because I know when we were doing this work before, I think maybe with Chloe, and I tried to get a picture of somebody's house, and the owner came bursting out the door and said, "What are you taking a picture of my house for?"
Yeah, no, that happens a lot, and so don't put yourself in any situations that you don't feel safe, or you feel like you're kind of intruding. Luckily, because we have, I mean, it's great to see them in person. We also, I mean, Google Street View, I think, for St. Catharines is up to date as of the last year. I think the picture we were just looking at was 2022. So generally, we will have some sort of recent image of the photo or of the property. If you feel comfortable taking a photo, by all means, there's a place to upload it when you do fill out your survey. What I would actually recommend, maybe instead of submitting your surveys like one at a time as you look at properties, is maybe just write down your answers, and then because you might go back and want to change them, right? So maybe just, you know, on a piece of paper, write down what your answers would be, and then you could do a bulk at a time. So you could do maybe 5 or 6 or 10 or something like that at a time, and input them through the survey later on, just so that way, you know, you're able to then change your mind if you want to, or if you have, you know, different thoughts, or if you come across something that makes you think, oh, I should revisit that other property, that would give you a chance to do that. But yeah, the photos, if you have them, great. If not, it's not a huge deal, I don't think. Mark?
Yeah. So when you first presented us with this rubric, we went over things and we changed something straight away. Because I printed off the original one and I forgot about the maybe on number 5. Yeah. What was the value of that, and what else did we change?
So that was the only one. That's the only one that we changed, or that we added, and that's 3 points for maybe. I'll resend the rubric to everybody, so that way you have a copy. So that way, sorry about that. I should have done that, but yeah, I'll make sure that gets sent out to everybody.
All right. Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
It's a good approach though, James, because if we write them down, then we can even reflect on our previous scores and say, you know, if this is a 7, that one shouldn't be, you know, that sort of thing. I think it's good.
Yeah. And I don't mind making the changes for you. Like if you go and, you know, score a property and then you realize a few weeks later, you know what, I feel differently about it, just let me know. Send me an email. I can change all the scores internally. It's not challenging at all for me to do it. It doesn't bother me. So yeah.
Or if we had some forms like in our car, just print it out, right? And then it's easy to use that.
I could certainly print out the form if it would help everybody, and then I can leave them at City Hall and just have them at the counter for somebody to pick up if you want them. Would that be easier for you, Holly? Or
yeah, I would like some forms in my car. Yeah.
Okay, I'll print them out next week, and then I'll just leave them at our counter at City Hall, at the planning counter, and then you can come and pick them up as you'd like. Is there anybody else that would really appreciate having those forms printed so I can make sure there's enough copies?
If you could send me a copy,
Okay.
I'd like, and I can make my own copies, but I would like some hard copies, yes.
Okay, sounds good.
So it sounds like we have a theoretical motion here that the designation subcommittee approve the usage of the prioritization rubric for the Heritage Register designations prioritization project. Is anyone would like to make that motion?
Nobody's going.
Like Brian. And all in favor?
We all are.
All right, so that carries, and we have a system to show Gail.
Fantastic.
She will be pleased. So that concludes item 7.1. Item 7.2 is the assignment of properties, which again, over to you, James.
Yeah, so I haven't assigned properties yet. My plan was to do that on Monday because I wanted to see if there were any particular areas of the city that anybody wanted to focus on. Like, for example, Andrew, he brought all the properties on Elizabeth Street in. Maybe he would be interested in doing the Elizabeth Street properties. I'm not sure, but or if just geographically, if it was just easier for somebody to do a certain part of the city versus another. I just wanted to give that opportunity for you to kind of voice that now, and I can make sure to make note of that.
I'd like to send you a list if that's possible. I'm happy to go through it now, but that'll take up a bunch of everybody's time. But there's some properties that I'm interested in, some that I have done some research on already from last time, so it makes sense to carry over.
Sure.
But if it's okay to send you those, it's sort of some I've done, and then some I'm sort of interested in the western ones, a lot of the old Louth Township, just because I have an interest in it and more knowledge of the history of that area. So. Yeah. It seems like a natural fit for me, and I can send you that list.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. If anybody else has properties that you really want to focus on, or if you just want to send a list, by all means, you're welcome to. But if there are certain areas of the city, send me an email, or you can let me know right now, and I'll make sure to do my best to kind of allocate appropriately. Like I said, my goal is to make sure that each property is viewed by myself and 2 of you. So the total, I think, is going to be about 24 properties total. But we have, between now and Christmas time almost to do it. So it averages out to about 2 a week, which, is not too bad. Yeah, and if we can get 3 eyes, pairs of eyes on each property, I think, we can't ask for much more than that. And I think we'll be in good shape.
Are these then properties that are already on a list that you have, or like, because there's a few North End farmhouses that I've had my eye on, but they haven't been on a list before. So is this the kind of thing that I can say, hey, I'm interested in like 94 Arthur Street or something?
Yeah, we just want to focus on the register ones because we're going to be losing those from the register at the end of next year. So I'll send out, I've created the list of all the properties. It's 60, I think it's 61 properties long. So I'll send out that list to everybody today. And you can just look at it and you can see if there's any specific properties that you're, really keen to look at. But yeah, any new properties, we'll kind of deal with those, as we need to, I think. Unfortunately, there's so many properties in the city that probably should be on a register. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was just going to say, when we talked about it before, we said that if there's something someone comes across that seems like not just worthy of being on the register, but a strong candidate for designation, then maybe we add it in, but set the bar pretty high and make sure that we're not slowing down the process regarding the properties that we've already identified as worthy of taking a look at. Yeah,
the other issue we run into is kind of a strategic one where you only have 2 years that it's on the register, right? So you have to be kind of careful about that, where if we added some properties that we weren't sure were going to make the cut for designation, then we actually in 2 years from now, we run into the issue of them getting removed from the register, right? So yeah, so I prefer we just, unless there's something you really feel extremely strong about, just stick to the properties on the register, and because I think we have enough of those to keep us busy. Okay, so I don't think there's any motion needed for this one, but I'll send out, as soon as we're done our meeting, I'll send out the list of properties to everybody. You can kind of take a look. I'll group them by area. It's actually interesting. There's kind of pockets of the city that seem to have listed buildings. So, and what my plan is to batch them together, so that way you're not driving all over the city going from house to house. You'll be able to do like one street at a time, right? So it'll make things hopefully a lot more efficient for everybody.
And sorry, just to the list I was thinking about sending you, I realize now that some of those are properties that I've identified from the list to look at, so they're not even registered. So maybe I should wait to see your list before I send you anything, because I probably am sending you a list of properties that are not unregistered. So
Okay,
it's kind of
yeah, I'll send that out, and then if you sometime next week, if you want to get back to me and let me know which properties you're interested in, then that's great. It's if I get that, if I get your responses by Monday or Friday or whatever next week, it doesn't make a huge difference. It just allows me to make sure that people are doing the work that they want to be doing, because you're all volunteers. I want you to do interesting properties that properties that are interesting to you, right? So yeah.
Good.
Okay, so I don't think we need a motion for that one either. I think we're in good shape.
So that concludes item 7.2, moves on to item number 8, business arising from the meeting, from the minutes. Any business arising from the minutes? I don't think so. No. Okay. So any items of correspondence? No.
Nope, there's nothing.
All right. So the date of our next meeting is October 20th, 2023, and I presume that'll be 2:00 again, is our standard.
Yeah. Did this time works for everybody still? Today was okay. Just want to make sure. So
Good.
great.
All right. So we now are ready to adjourn. Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll adjourn.
All right, Holly moves that the St. Catharines Heritage Advisory Committee Designation Subcommittee meeting be adjourned at, what time is it? 3:22 p.m. All in favor? Brian wants to stay, but he is outvoted, so too bad. I think we're officially adjourned, and we'll register in the minutes Brian's protest over them.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks all. I appreciate the work that you put into preparing for today's meeting.
Nice work, James. Thank you.
Have a good
Okay.
weekend.